Want help to grow your business? Download BRiN, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit BRiN.ai or search the App Store today.
Hi, welcome to Communication in Crisis. My name is Kylie Warry, author, speaker, and trainer. Today we're speaking a bit more about how to deal with the impact of a crisis. Last time we spoke about how a crisis can impact the powerful and the patient communicator. Today we're focusing on the playful and the perfectionist communicator and how they are impacted in a crisis. So we've talked a lot about poor communication. Poor communication is the foundation at the bottom of all communication crisis. Communication is like oxygen in our relationships, and if we're not able to communicate our needs clearly, to explain what's going wrong, to ask for help, to explain what the problem is, then the cycle is only going to spiral out of control. We've talked about in business how poor communication costs business up to 32% of profit. Now, every time I mention this when I'm speaking at conferences or speaking to teams, I ask people who's willing to give me that 32% of their profit, and no one wants to part with it. Yet a lot of the time, we're not putting things in place that actually help us to hang on to that profit and have much healthier communication in our teams. The other way that poor communication affects a team is by good people leaving. Now, when there's an environment of poor communication, of toxic communication in a workplace, good people end up leaving. The reason they do is because they don't know what to do to actually survive in an environment like that. Now, I don't know about you, but I've certainly worked in those environments before, and I think it's one of the reasons why I have decided to work in this space, because I know how painful it is when you're struggling in a workplace where poor communication is rampant, where you suggest a positive change or suggest something that might help and it falls on deaf ears, where you can't do your job and use your strengths because there's so much toxicity, so much negativity in that workplace. And it's something that we just don't need to settle for. So what I want to teach you guys is how to be better communicators and how to recognise when you're in a crisis and what to do about it. Now, when we're impacted by a crisis, the first thing we notice is that feeling of offence. It's not a nice feeling. In fact, it's actually a very yucky feeling. Now, offence is something that is really neither here nor there because, again, like crisis and change, it's guaranteed. You can be offended just walking down the street if you decide to be. The powerful thing about it is that you actually have control over whether you want to stay offended or whether you actually want to move past that. Now, offence is just an emotion. It could be frustration, hurt, guilt, resentment. There are so many different names you can give it. But you can decide whether you want to feel that way or whether you actually want to do something that will actually stop you from feeling that way. And that's all about learning how to manage your emotions. And each communication style learns how to do that differently. That's why you need to learn to understand yourself so that you can then understand others and communicate with intention. Now, if you ignore those emotions, if you ignore that offence, unfortunately, it doesn't go away. It actually grows and it will spiral out of control. Now, each of us has probably one of those people in our world, someone who's either really angry or really negative. When I'm running workshops at times and I ask people about pessimists and people that are difficult to deal with, everyone's got a story of someone in their world that all they talk about is a past offence that's still got them and they can't move past it. The great thing is if that's happened to you, then you can choose whenever you want to move past it. You see, those negative, unhelpful thoughts, those past offences, those things that have happened, if you don't tend to them, they grow like weeds in a garden and they start to strangle all of the good. But like any good gardener, you can get in there and get rid of those really unhelpful negative thoughts and you can actually move past that, manage that emotion so that you can actually deal more effectively in a crisis. Now, this is what I call the cycle of offence. Now, this is something that if we don't manage those emotions, if we don't manage that hurt and resentment, we go through this cycle. And it's something that can happen quite quickly, and it's something that you can get stuck in completely. Now look, if someone's really hurt you and you want to be offended for a while, go for it. Have a party, roll around in it, do whatever you need to do, but don't stay there. It doesn't help anyone if you get stuck in this cycle of offence. There's a much healthier thing that you can do, and it looks similar, but it's called developing that courageous intention. Now, I use the word courageous because it takes courage. Dealing with these negative emotions, dealing with things that hurt us, sometimes we think it's easier to run away, but it actually is much easier to deal with them sooner rather than later. Any problem, it's much better to deal with it before it grows. And problems, like weeds, will grow if we don't deal with them. So what we're talking about today is the first step in this process. It's right down the bottom, and it's called the impact. So a crisis has happened, a change has happened, and you have been impacted. Now, what do you do with the impact, and how does it affect the different DNA styles? The reason we want to learn about ourselves is because developing self-awareness is the first step in a roadmap to better communication. You need to be able to understand yourself in a new way, in a way that helps you deal more effectively in a crisis. If you're spiraling out of control, you're really the only one who can do something about it. Yes, other people can do something that's helpful, they can create an environment for you to actually get through that, but it really stops with you. The first stage to having better communication is understanding yourself. If you understand yourself, you can then move forward to understanding others. If you can understand others, you're then able to communicate courageously and with intention. Now, communicating with intention is all about communicating with care and with purpose. It's about looking at a situation and going, what is the best way for me to handle this? It's about being able to step back and getting rid of the emotion, which is not easy in a crisis, but managing that emotion and going, if I do this, it'll help. But if I do this, it's actually going to make things a whole lot worse. And you consciously choosing what road you're going to take. Now, this is available to all of us, and it's what we'll be covering in coming episodes. So today is all about the impact and the playful and perfectionist communicator. So we've talked a bit about communication DNA, but this is the first step in self-awareness. If you don't understand what makes you tick, if you don't understand what helps you, what holds you back, what stresses you out, what your strengths are, what value you bring to a team, then you're really not self-aware. And if you're not self-aware, then how on earth can you deal not only with a normal situation effectively, but with a crisis? Because everything gets out of control in a crisis. And we need that grounding, we need that foundation so we can look at ourselves and go, I'm starting to feel a bit tense here, I'm reacting to this, and understanding why. You also need to be able to do that for other people in your world, because we're not islands. We are people that live in communities, that work in workplaces, and we have families and people around us. So the more that we can actually see when a crisis is impacting someone else in our world, the more we'll be able to help the situation and actually get through it with wisdom, rather than feeling resentful and hurt. The first communication style we're talking about today is the playful communicator. Now, you might remember these guys. They're the talkers, the storytellers. They're fun, they're motivating, and most of us have one of these at least in our world. I'm actually surrounded by these guys. I think it's the universe's way of telling me that I need to lighten up. And it's just, they're the style that they just make a workplace a happier place, they make a family a happier place, and they say things like, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. Now, if you remember back to the communication DNA model, the famous version of a playful communicator is Ellen DeGeneres. Now, these guys are observed to be talkative, loud, and funny. They're always telling stories, they're always performing. If you're in a workplace and you're trying to have a meeting, these guys are probably talking about things that aren't related to the meeting. They might hijack the meeting and go off on a tangent, but that's how they roll. They want to be recognised. These guys, the reason they're telling stories and telling jokes and performing is so we like them. They want to be liked. It's the most important thing for these guys. And they need a fun, interesting, and friendly environment. So if this is you, then hopefully you're learning a bit more about yourself and you're raising that self-awareness. But if this is someone else in your world, then it really helps to understand their motivations and why they do what they do. It takes us a long way to dealing more effectively in relationships, but also to dealing with a crisis, because that's when we really need to be great communicators. So the sorts of things that impact a playful communicator. Anything that means social ridicule to these guys really cuts straight to the core. They want to be liked, they want to be friendly, and if they get cut out of something, if they feel like they're being made fun of in a way that they don't like, if they feel like they're not being included in something, then that will really, really hurt them. They also need a fun and interesting environment. So if they're in a situation where they're stuck, for example, at a computer or in a room on their own with no social interaction, that will be like they're suffocating. They need people around them. It's like oxygen for these guys. And they need to feel that they're heard and understood in a workplace or a family environment. Now, if they're in a crisis, if something's impacted them and they're not dealing with it well, their response might surprise you. They actually get louder, they get more talkative, and they probably get crazily optimistic. Their most common emotional response is optimism. That's what makes them such great motivators in a team. They're really good at saying, "We can do it, I know we can." Just don't expect them to do the work. They're the motivators, they're not the doers. Other people on the DNA profile are the ones that get the work done. So don't be frustrated if this is what's happening with the people in your world, because that's just how they roll. If you want them to finish something, you need to actually keep them accountable. So under stress and pressure, these guys will talk even more. They will tell even crazier stories, they will make inappropriate jokes. Their behaviour can come across as almost quite selfish and self-important. Now that's a warning sign for you guys. If you notice someone doing that, it's a really big sign that they're under stress. Let's share an example of someone who is a playful communicator and is in the middle of a crisis. Now, this fellow was someone that I coached a little while ago, and he was a service manager. He was a very popular, very well-liked guy, and everyone loved him. He was always the centre of attention. He was always taking the team down the pub after, work on a Friday to have a couple of drinks and relax, and he was just a really well-liked guy. He was great at pumping the team up and great at getting them motivated, but then when the team wasn't self-motivating, things would probably fall off the bandwagon a little bit. Now, if something was starting to go wrong in the team and he had to deal with a problem, he didn't really know how to do it. And the thing for him was that he was quite optimistic and very friendly, but he was so fearful that if he had to do something a bit confronting or a bit serious, that people wouldn't like him anymore. And being liked is one of his foundation needs. And so the bigger the problems got in the team, he would sort of avoid them and just try and get, a bit more optimistic and try and pump people up and say, "We'll be fine, we'll get..."
To continue enjoying this presentation, download BRiN, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit BRiN.ai or search the App Store today.